So today I'd like to talk about voice acting, mainly a specific element of voice acting, because a lot of people make a lot of stupid jokes. I mean, they're not stupid; they're funny. They're as hell. But a lot of jokes about you know me using like three voices, which is very true. It's very true. I think most voice actors I know of, and most voice actors I've heard, also only have about three voices, the exception maybe being Dragon, who's insane. Um, but it's something I wanted to discuss because while it's true that I do use very similar voices for a lot of characters, I feel like all of them are slightly different, mostly just in ways that a lot of people wouldn't be able to grasp unless you really pay attention, you really listen. So my main point of contention over this is when we started streaming Homestuck, a lot of people, heard my Rose Lalonde voice and just said, "Oh, well, that's just Monica." Huh. 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 It's so funny. But a lot of people, were like, "Oh, that's the same voice you use for your Monica voice." And yes, it is. But at the same time, it really isn't. And this doesn't mean like in the way, it's hard to explain. This doesn't mean in the actual voice I'm using. I mean more so in the way that I pronounce words and the way that I say things. Because yeah, I'm using the same part of my vocal cords to do both of these voices, but I'm using very different methods of actually speaking. So allow me to give you an example. And all the Doki fanboys are going to shit their pants right now. Because, for example, when I'm voicing Monica, Monica has this very distinct way of talking that I developed. She often goes up in the middle of sentences and then suddenly goes down at the end. It's a very strange way of talking, but I think it really works for her well as the sort of almost motherly figure of the literature club. Especially the fact that she says literature club that very specific way. I don't think I've ever talked as her and said literature club and not as literature club. And as a side note, you notice all the Dokis say literature club a different way. Sarah's like the literature club, and Natsuki's like the literature club, and Yuri's like the literature club. They all say it very differently. But anyway, I digress. That's a weird digression. As for Rose, yes, she has the same voice, but she says things very differently. Where Monica is very friendly and very, "Hi, welcome to the literature club," Rose is very just drawling and very, "Oh my god, you're such an idiot. I can't believe I'm talking to you right now. Dave, just go fuck yourself, Dave. Really, just do it. Just do it. Just go in a corner and suck your own dick. I don't care. Just lean over, break your neck, and suck it." So if you notice, I emphasize words very differently, and that wasn't even really my Rose, that wasn't even really my Rose, this is more my Rose. So she's a little bit lower than Monica is, and she also says things very differently, she often hovers at the tops of sentences before coming down at the end a little bit, instead of Monica, who starts off low, gets high, and then goes back down again. It's just interesting to think about. It's an interesting concept in voice acting, and I use it a lot to give different characters different identities. I think, that's why a lot of times, especially when I'm live streaming, you'll notice that the more I voice a character, the more I get into their voice. Mad Father's a good prime example. Part of that as well is because I figured out Ogre was going to have a ridiculous Shrek accent halfway through. But a lot of it as well was just me getting more familiar with the characters. If you go back and you go to the beginning, Aya just kind of talks like this. She just has a slight British accent. But then by the end, I've developed this really bizarre way of talking. Father. And of course, I use that to annoy Dragon to this day. Ha 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 ha. But it's really an interesting concept. And I experience this all the time when places you guys don't even realize, especially during recording. During recording, all of my friends will, develop their character voices the more they do things. Alamise usually does multiple takes just so she can get into it. And, 9 times out of 10, I use her second take because it's usually better. And usually she's gotten into the voice more. Whereas, when I'll sit down live with them and work out voices, James might take a few minutes to get into. James actually took a, pretty decent length of time to develop James Jameson from Wally Franks, because, Wally Franks is very down here like this, and then James Jameson is a little more up here, and he's a lot slower, and he talks a lot more like this. Hiya, family. Even though it's kind of the same voice, it's a very different method of delivery, and James himself probably doesn't even realize he's done this. He just, did it because the character changed and the character became something else. I experienced this a lot with Dragon too. We were in a call the other day to do a voice for Escaped Chasm, which will probably come out soon. I have the footage. I just need to get off my ass and edit it. But he needed to voice this character, and it took us a few minutes to kind of communicate what I wanted for it. But also the fact remained that the first video with this character's voice will sound pretty different than the second video with this character's voice, because after the first video, Dragon was able to figure out exactly, how this character talked and how this character spoke. And this is a way that the actual dialogue itself can really come into handy. So things that are better written are much easier to voice for. I make a comment in an upcoming video that I won't tell you a lot about yet, but it's an interesting concept I'm trying out. That'll probably be used for live streams, but I was really bored this afternoon, decided to try out a mini little pilot version. And I make a comment in that video that the dialogue in this thing I'm doing is written very well, because I could tell exactly how this one character spoke from about 2 lines of dialogue, which was fascinating and interesting for me. And this is not to say that things that take me longer to get into the character groove are not bad writing. I just think that it's really interesting as a writer as well, how authors can do things to make their dialogue, really speak to the character. Yeah, and I've been told my dialogue is kind of cheesy before. I had a friend of mine, Ventus Agri from the Discord server, decided to drunk read one of my stories. And upon listening to it, I realized how silly all of the dialogue sounded. But if, you go back and listen to my original recording, the dialogue doesn't really sound stupid at all, because I'm reading it in the intended tone of voice with the intended, character voice behind it. I mean, and yes, some of the dialogue in that particular story is just kind of cheesy because of the fact that that story was just kind of self-indulgent and more for me than the people listening to Edie Valley, really. Because I hadn't really done that. I wanted to make a self-indulgent story, so I did. But I just think it's very interesting and very fascinating. And, maybe next time I do a voice that sounds kind of similar to Monica when I, do a voice in this tone, because I do this for a lot of characters, because this is a tone of voice that Alamis can't really use, so I have to fill in with a lot of the deeper voice characters. Maybe you'll notice that it's not really Monica. It's just, in fact, the same type of voice with different inflections behind it. So, yeah.